Hello everyone, my name is Hina Tukkar. I am a regulatory consultant at Alceon MedTech Consulting. Welcome to an introductory module on usability engineering. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an idea of what usability engineering is, why it is important in the field of medical devices, and what are the steps that a medical device manufacturer needs to take in order to perform the usability engineering successfully. Okay, so let's get started by understanding what the term usability engineering means. In technical words, it is a process to understand how human interacts with the technology or a particular product. And it is a process by which the manufacturer or the design developer can understand the user interfaces of the product and how it affects human interactions. Let me simplify this for you. So, usability engineering is all about understanding the human behavior or predicting the human behavior towards a particular product and how the user will interact with that particular product or a device in this case. Let's take a simple example of our mobile phones. Imagine yourself talking to someone over phone and you think that the volume is too low or the volume is too loud. So your fingers immediately reach to where the volume keys are without really looking at the phone or without getting an introduction into the talking. So you would naturally press the up button for increasing the volume and you would press the down button for decreasing the volume. So this is the predictable human behavior that the design developer would have thought of at the time of designing the product. The same concept applies in the case of medical devices. We will look into a specific example from the medical device field to make it more clear and see how it makes sense. Now, as I said in the beginning, that usability engineering is a process. If you listen to our last video on introductory module of ISO 13485, you may know that process is a set of activity that is being done in order to achieve desired output. And in order to achieve this desired output, there are certain set of inputs that are being given in order to perform the process. So the same concept really applies also in the case of usability engineering. So in this case, the process is using the device, and the desired outcome is making sure that the device is used correctly. So in order to achieve the desired outcome, the medical device manufacturer needs to take into account three considerations on a broader level: use environment, user, and the device user interface. So use environment is something wherein the manufacturer would think at the time of designing the device, how frequently the device will be used, what will be the location where the device will be used. Will it be used in a laboratory setting or will it be used in a home care setting? Similarly, the user itself means that the manufacturer needs to understand the persona of the user. The manufacturer needs to understand the level of education, the level of experience, or the level of trainings that will be required for the person or for the user in order to use the device. Remember, the desired outcome that we want is not only the user using the device, but the desired outcome is to make sure that the device is being used correctly. And the third and the most interesting one is considering device user interfaces. So the characteristics of the interaction between the device and the user needs to be considered. For example, the operating principle of the device needs to be well thought while designing the product and making sure that the user understands the operating principle of the product. Reading instructions for use that are being provided or reading labels that are being provided to the user would need to be understood or would need to be studied at the time of designing the product. So ultimately, by considering these three parameters on a broader level, the intention of manufacturer is to make sure that the device is being used correctly and the desired outcome is being achieved when the device is in real use. So the catch here is to know that usability engineering concept is actually applied while designing the product so that there is a greater amount of confidence in the manufacturer that the device will be used correctly when it goes out in the real world setting. All right, so let's understand what the term user interface is all about because that will really set the foundation for you to perform usability engineering correctly. So user interface is any means by which user and the medical device is interacting. Now, though the prime focus here is to understand the human behavior with device itself, if you really think about it, the interaction of the user with that particular product begins early on, even before the user is close to using the product. Let's understand this by an example. So what you see in the first picture here is the backside of the product, which is showing off the labels to the user. And the second picture, the bottom one here, is about the front side of the packet, wherein the syringe is clearly seen. So just by visually seeing this, user is actually interacting with the product, right? So if you can see in the image that is given here in form of label, there is information that is being sought by the user. So the user can see the pictorial presentation here. The user can understand the symbols here or the expiry date and the manufacturing date that is written here. There is a barcode given here which would enable the user to think that if they scan the barcode, they will get more information on the product. Similarly, the front side of the packet is enabling the user to think that they are receiving the product that they ordered, for example, or that product is in the sealed packet. So the packet itself is revealing the information to the user and they're enabling the user to think that they now need to open it in a particular way. Similarly, the second picture here is about the real interaction that we are more interested in, right? Which is about the user using the product. So if you're wondering how the user interface fits into applying the usability engineering concept altogether, the key thing here to understand is when the manufacturer is designing labels, when the manufacturer is designing the packaging of the product, or when they're designing the product itself, they need to consider user's perspective. They need to consider the three parameters that we saw on the previous slide and think and predict per se the human behavior when the product or the package or the label will be exposed in the real world setting. So once this understanding is set, you can then go into deriving the user interfaces, starting from reading or understanding the labels and using the product, or once the use is over, discarding the product. So the entire life cycle of this needs to be considered from the user's perspective in order to get them right. So now that we have understood what the term usability engineering means, what are the three broad level considerations that manufacturer needs to consider while they are designing the product, it is also important to understand why eventually it has to be considered, right? Of course, the very first answer that could come in your mind is to meet regulatory compliance. Well, that is all good, but if you really understand the significance of this concept, it will encourage you better into applying the concepts early on into the design phase. So as we have demonstrated so far, usability engineering will help you predict the human behavior while you are designing the product. It will also help you gain users' perspective. Now, just imagine yourself as a manufacturer, you've understood the user's perspective, you've kept them in the central focus when you're designing the product. And you know that understanding their behavior is going to help you design the product better. It is eventually going to reduce use errors when the device comes out in the real use, and it is also going to give certain level of satisfaction to the user, and eventually it is all linked with improvement in the quality, safety, and performance of the product. Because no matter how beautifully you are designing the product, how much efforts you have put in into designing the product, if the real use does not go right by the user who is intended to use the product is of no use, right? So it is very, very important to consider usability engineering early on when you're designing the product. Of course, in order to meet regulatory compliance, there are ways to meet compliance to this concept, even if you argue that you have designed your product and your product is already out there in the market. So how can you go back and apply usability engineering concept? There are still ways to comply with the requirements, and there are still ways for you to benefit from this concept. But we will not go to that extent in the introductory module at this point. All right, so let's take a look at the step-by-step process for you to apply usability engineering. So the first step starts with you identifying users, use environment, and device user interfaces as we talked before. So this is actually the starting point for you to start applying this concept. Once you have gathered inputs on these three parameters, it is important to perform risk analysis. So it is important to identify the level of risks and estimate the risks so that you can later on control them when you're designing the product actually. Then it is time for you to transfer over your findings to the design engineer in a more technical language so that they can take into account these specifications or use specifications into designing the product. So user interface specifications are actually equivalent to design inputs, but these specifications are more from the user's end that you have collected at the time of deriving use specifications. Then it is time to obviously design the device. So designing the product is an exercise that is repetitive in nature. So you may start with prototypes or wireframes or sketches or drawings, etc. And once you have any prototypes in hand, it is time for you to plan the testing of the product. So in case of usability engineering, there are two types of testings that may take place. The first type is formative testing, which could be through interviews or cognitive walkthroughs or getting some expert advice or actually testing the prototype before it is finalized. The second type of testing is summative evaluation, which is the simulated use validation testing in order for you to confirm that the intended use of the product is meeting user needs. Now, remember that formative testing is actually iterative in nature. So when you perform formative testing, you need to remember that you have to perform that to finalize the prototype in itself. And when you're performing summative evaluation, you need to remember that you perform summative evaluation on a prototype that is now finalized. Because in case of summative evaluation, you would actually expose your final prototype to the real users. Now, as far as the documentation is concerned, in case of usability engineering, you need to remember two things. One, that you're planning what you're going to do while applying the usability engineering concept. And once you've planned out and once you've performed the activities as planned, you're generating reports or you're generating records out of it. So everything put together, you can combine everything into one dossier, which is called usability engineering file. However, it is not necessary to have a separate usability engineering file altogether. These records could be a part of your risk management file, or it could also be a part of your design history file. Now, as long as the usability activities are performed, as long as they are recorded and documented appropriately, it will not really matter whether you have a binder called usability engineering file separately. So it all depends on how your organization follows documentation practices. But the key thing to remember is to, first of all, plan out the activities. So you may have usability evaluation plan on a broader level, and then you can have two separate plans, one for formative plan, one for formative testing and the other for summative testing, or you can combine everything into one plan called usability evaluation planning. As you perform activities, it is important to keep recording the results and the outcomes that you're getting out of these activities. So you need to document the use specifications, the user interface specifications itself. You also need to make sure that your usability engineering file is in a way interconnected with the risk management file, or make sure that the risk management activities are summarized within the usability engineering file. And as obvious as it sounds, the results of usability testing needs to be documented in the usability engineering binder per se. So before concluding the introductory module on usability engineering, we wanted to give you some references from regulatory standpoint. IEC 62366 is a two-part series. There are guidances from USFDA as well as MHRA on the concepts of human factors and usability engineering. Specifically, the MHRA guidance refers to drug device combinations as well, and the latest version was released in 2021. ISO 9241 is the series of standard that focuses on ergonomics of human computer interactions. From the medical device standpoint, specifically the parts 110 and part 210 are interesting because they lay out the design principles for interactive systems. So we encourage you to check them out. If you're interested in the full day course on usability engineering or any other topics of your choice, you may please feel free to reach out to us. We are also in the business of providing regulatory and quality assurance consulting services to medical and IVD device manufacturers. EQMS is one of our new products that we have now launched. So if you're someone who is looking out to transition from your paper-based quality management system to an electronic version of it, please feel free to reach out to us for a free demo and allow us to understand your needs. This is now the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your time.